Hello everybody, welcome to Totally Tabled. My name is Shaggy, and this is Retail Rundown, where I quickly go over the newest soloable board games to hit the retail market, at least where I live in the United States. If I missed a release that you feel deserves attention, please give it a mention in the comments below. First up are 3 games that I included on my top 10 most anticipated solo games of Gen Con 2025 list. They've already hit retail in certain places, so I want to cover them again, briefly. Let's start with the Peak Team. This is a cooperative game for 1 to 5 players where you take the role of a ranger with a mission to protect various animals in your wildlife reserve. The central board represents different regions of your reserve, which is dominated by this massive mountain. You're going to need these tool cards in order to travel and explore the difficult terrain. Now, the central mechanism of the game is something that they're calling reverse drafting, which basically means you draft cards to give to other players rather than to yourself. I like that idea in theory, but it does sound like a mechanism built for larger player counts. I'm very curious to see how that works in solo mode. BGG lists the playing time of the Peak Team at 60 minutes, which seems pretty quick. And the artwork is bright and colorful, which I'm always happy to see. I've recently been pleasantly surprised by several games designed by Scott Almes, so hopefully the trend will continue. Next is Dirt and Dust. This is a rally racing game for 1 to 4 players that combines deck building with dice placement. I'm a big fan of racing games, especially ones that include solo modes, which can be, few and far between. This one appears to abstract the racing course into a series of cards rather than using tiles on the table, and I think that's potentially a great idea. Through the Ages sure did a great job of abstracting the history of entire civilizations onto cards, so a racing game shouldn't be too difficult. There also seems to be some complexity under the hood here in terms of dealing with your card's handling and its special features. It reminds me a little bit of the video game Colin McRae Rally from back in the day. I'm also a huge fan of dice placement, so you can count me in for Dirt and Dust. And lastly, let's talk about Fliptoons. Fliptoons is a quick-playing small box deck building game for 1 to 4 players. You start with this tiny deck of cards portraying these toon actors, and then each round you're going to draw 6 cards from your personal deck and put them into a 3x2 grid. You don't get to choose where they go, they just go out into that grid. And the cards are going to interact with each other in various ways in order to generate fame, which you'll then use to hire additional toon actors or to dismiss bad actors from your deck, right? Thus thinning your deck. Once someone earns 30 or more fame during a round, that triggers the end of the game, and then everyone gets a final turn, and whoever earns the most fame on that final turn is the one who wins. I've actually had a chance to play this as a 3-player game on Board Game Arena, and it works exactly as I expected. It's a fairly random game where you don't have a ton of control. You're mostly gambling that certain cards will appear in the right spots, pushing your luck, or deciding to play it safe with less rewarding but more consistent cards. It plays unbelievably quickly, like 10 minutes or so, because everyone is playing at the same time. It really feels the same bucket as like Abandon All Artichokes and Point Salad and Llama and Push, games like that. This really is as streamlined as deck building can get, and yet it is silly fun. Now I'd like to move on to games that I haven't spoken about before. First up is A Place for All of My Books by Smirk and Dagger Games. This looks like a super cute worker placement puzzle game about gathering, sorting, and organizing books. I absolutely love that theme. I'm so glad that it isn't about organizing board games. And it appears like you're just trying to make simple patterns on a 4x4 grid, and you can stack up the books on top of each other. Certain goals seem to want you to create certain stacks or maybe groups of certain colors, things like that. Whenever I see a game like this, it reminds me of, Tiny Towns and Harmonies, but this one is giving me vibes of an older game called Reef. I don't know if anyone remembers this really great thinky puzzle game. I highly recommend giving that one a try, although I don't think that it had an official solo mode, at least not as far as I remember. According to BGG, A Place for All My Books has a solo mode where you have to beat the game's rival, Penelope Everready, a quote, untiring extrovert who seems to be grabbing all the books you wanted. Now, these are the kind of stakes that I need right now. That reads to me like there's a win-loss condition rather than just a beat your own high score. And if that's true, that would certainly be different than most similar puzzle games. So you can definitely count me intrigued. Next up is Nature by North Star Games Studio. This is another redesign of the popular, or at least once popular, card game Evolution. One could make an entire video essay on the history of this game and all the remakes and offshoots and expansions. Unfortunately, Nature only adds to the confusion by creating a modular game system rather than just a single game. From what I understand, the base game is a streamlined version of Evolution, but it can be made more complex by adding modular expansions like Flight, Jurassic, Arctic Tundra, Natural Disasters, and Amazon Rainforest. All of those expansions might not be available right now, but at least a couple are. And I guess there's more to come, with the promise of releasing 1 to 2 new modules yearly for a decade. It's an interesting approach that I don't necessarily love, and I kind of question how well it will work. But I do enjoy Evolution. If you've never played, it's a fairly straightforward card game where you use trait cards to create unique species, and then you try to feed them and keep them alive. I'm always curious to see how solo modes work in games that didn't originally have them, and I love the artwork by Catherine Hamilton. She also worked on the previous Evolution and the game Oceans. I'm a sucker for nature-themed games with beautiful artwork, so this will probably end up in my collection at some point. And now let's talk briefly about Railroad Tiles by Horrible Guild. This is a sequel to Railroad Inc., which is one of my favorite roll and write games. In Railroad Tiles, you instead draft track tiles from a common pool and you make routes in front of you, trying to create as many connections as possible. You'll also be able to place cars and trains and travelers in your little town. I'm not quite sure how those score points, but the game seems light and puzzly, and it plays very quickly, lasting only 8 rounds and around 30 minutes long. This is another game with just trainloads of expansions. You have the Deserts expansion that adds deserts that you can populate with camels. The Lakes expansion adds lakes that you can populate with ferries. The Countryside expansion adds farms that you can populate with pigs, cows, and sheep. I think you get the idea. One of the things I don't really enjoy about roll and write games is the writing part. It's just not as satisfying, at least not as satisfying as manipulating components. So if Railroad Tiles gives me Railroad Inc. gameplay, but with tiles and wooden pieces that I can move around, I might enjoy it even more. I definitely plan to find out. Now I'll quickly run through a handful of other soloable games that recently grabbed my attention. Moon Bunny looks like a cute game where you move your bunnies on a grid of tiles, picking up ingredients and recipes and trying to arrange them in specific patterns to, I quote, brew the ultimate elixir of life. The bunny who is able to gift this elixir to the world, bringing health and happiness to all, wins the game. How can you say no to that? Ink looks like an even lighter and quicker playing pattern building and tile laying game. The components look gorgeous, even if the whole thing is absolutely totally abstract. You'll be trying to complete contracts by placing ink tiles in specific patterns. I find that these kinds of spatial puzzle games work well solo, as long as you're into that sort of thing. Tianxia is a medium-weight Eurogame that very much reminds me of Zhanguo, right down to the wooden wall pieces. Now, Tianxia's art and components look very pretty in that modern Euro way, but it also looks a little too familiar. Some people would say that about every Euro game, but I'm a fan of the genre, and I'm feeling this way. It's probably a great game, and maybe you'll be more excited about it. I just think I have this huge backlog of Euros, and it just might not be for me right now, but I'm sure in time I'll get around to playing it. Now, in contrast, House of 1,000 Corpses doesn't look like most board games. It certainly has a darker and more disturbing theme than most. This is a cooperative game based on the movie, where you play the killers searching for victims hiding in your house. I have no idea if the gameplay holds up, but IP games have been trending upward, and I always welcome a bit more horror in the hobby. Speaking of horror, Van Ryder Games just released 2 new expansions for Final Girl. You have Final Girl Bad Time at Buddyland and Final Girl Shriek. I first read that as Shrek, which would be a very different game. The first is a Five Nights at Freddy's homage, complete with Billy Bear and his murderous animatronic buddies. You'll need to turn off Billy's power supplies or he'll keep recharging and keep killing. Final Girl Shriek takes place at a board game convention overrun with overexcited gamers seeking out the hottest new games. Unfortunately, Mort, the teenage dirtbag, has brought masks of all of his favorite Final Girl killers, and he uses a different one to kill each victim. The last victim, of course, will be you, especially if I'm the one playing. So there we go, a bunch of new solo games hitting retail. Which ones did I miss? Please let me know in the comments below. And I'd like to thank all of the financial supporters of Totally Tabled, including the Totally Radical Hextra, John Kohler, Scott Myers, and Jay Satterwhite, as well as the Totally Bodacious Poppy. If you're interested in becoming a member, you can join on YouTube or my Patreon at www.patreon.com/totallytabled. You'll gain access to my new exclusive podcast, Table Talk, as well as unboxing videos and whatever extra stuff I come up with. As always, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.